Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Licensing and Appeals Committee hearing of the Derbyshire Dales District Council. Could we have the apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies from Councillors Donnelly, Cruz, Wayne, Allison, Buttle and Wakeman.
Very good, thank you. Approval of last meeting's minutes. Colin? Stuart? All those in favour? Okay, thank you. Interests, members, any interests? Councillor Lees?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say that I am a chairman of a premises which is does have a sitting out licence. Whether that makes any difference to tonight's meeting or not on the agenda.
Make any difference, Gary?
It would have to be your decision about whether it makes a difference or not, but it's either pecuniary or a non-pecuniary interest. So I don't think tonight's decision is based on anything to do with finance. So, or I don't think there is a vote to be made, is there?
We're just asking for a fee to be considered, but that would go to GR.
Yeah.
So that might be the appropriate time to declare an interest.
Public participation, you can see there is no public. Item 5, Business and Planning Act 2020, Pavement Licence Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2022, Extension of Temporary Pavement Licence Regime. Eileen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's the title. So this is it's an update report, really, Chair, on the current situation regarding the temporary pavement licensing regime that the government introduced back in 2020 to help food and drink businesses during the recovery after COVID. So basically, when the scheme was introduced in 2020, it was just introduced for a year, due to expire the end of September 2021. But because COVID continued, the scheme, there were actually the same regulations, but where it says Regulations 2022, they were called Regulations 2021, and they extended the scheme at that time until the end of September this year, the end of 2022. So what's happened now is this July, the government has decided that they've introduced these new regulations, and it includes provisions to extend the expiry date of this temporary licensing regime to September the 30th, 2023, after which time it's not really known what will happen, but there is a suggestion that it may well become a permanent function of the district and borough councils. As pre-COVID, it was a county council function to issue pavement cafe licences. So the report itself is fairly self-explanatory. It outlines the history of the last couple of years, how the regime came about, and what we as a district council were expected to do. During that period, some members may remember that we decided to deal with any applications from premises that were on council-owned land. So, as Councillor Lees earlier spoke, there are premises and marketplace at Ashbourne that have got what is in effect a pavement licence, but it's actually called a sitting out licence because it's not on the public highway. Therefore, it doesn't fall under the Business and Planning Act regulations. But we decided at that time, or the committee decided at that time, we would treat those applications in a similar way. So we did deal with probably 9 or 10 applications for sitting out licences, which the council issued those ones for 2 years. So they're only just due to expire at the end of this month. The Estates and Facilities Department, I understand, are going to be dealing with those applications rather than the licensing team dealing with them as pavement licenses. So at the time, back in 2020, the government did put a cap on charging a fee for processing pavement licences. Prior to then, county councils were issuing them, and there was a variety of fees or a variance in the fees charged by different county councils, and some of them were considerably higher. So the government capped it at £100, so that a pavement licence could be charged for if a council wished to, but it couldn't charge more than £100. At that time in 2020, and again in 2021, when we took a refresher report back to committee, it was agreed that this council wouldn't charge the application fee for these temporary licences at the time to assist business recovery. However, we did say at that time, or officers recommended to the committee at the time, that if it were to be extended further or to be kept being extended, then we would perhaps have to look at charging a fee in the future. So basically, the report gives an outline of the regime so far, and it also asks members to consider in principle whether or not we ought to be recommending to the Governance and Resources Committee, when they do the annual fee setting, to charge a fee for this service. We have received what they call a new burdens grant from the government back in 2021 and early 2022, with a view to that assisting in implementing the temporary licensing regime. And continuing to implement it for this further year. Obviously, any shortfall in providing the cost of the service would have to be met by the council. So the officer's suggestion is that if we consider charging a fee, then that would meet the business would be paying for any shortfall in the funding. So the two recommendations, Chair, at the beginning of the report, are that the extension to this licensing regime is implemented. I mean, that there isn't really an option there, so that we do implement it. But we need to encourage we need to encourage food and drink businesses that haven't so far taken us up on obtaining a pavement licence from us during the temporary regime. Perhaps they felt that one wasn't necessary temporarily, but we need to encourage those that have been using the facility to apply for a licence. So we need to put that into place. And as I say, the second recommendation refers to whether or not the committee feels that charging a fee would be appropriate, and we would need to report that in the annual fee setting report to Governance and Resources later in the year. So other than that, Chair, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Swindle.
Thank you, Chair. A few things going through my head. The first one, Irene, is this just for food and drink premises? What about those shops that put baskets and whatever on the...
No, it does apply just to food and drink premises. It was done purely to extend the area of premises for eating and drinking in the recovery after COVID.
Okay. I think I've got more questions, but the one that's in my head at the moment, I don't think you've got an answer for this. I just want to sort of pick your brains on it. But at the moment, with regards to COVID, infection rates, as far as I'm aware, are quite low. And there doesn't seem to be a great amount of public anxiety about it at the moment. That's just from my personal perception. But we're constantly told that COVID's going to come in waves, and over the winter it may, peak, and then again through the spring. So if we were to introduce a fee on the grounds that things seem to be improving, and if you want to carry on along these lines, then you've got to pay for it, because it's to me it's like a bonus now to businesses to be able to have that additional seating outside. But would it then be sort of harsh on the business if things went bad again and they've got no choice? Does that make sense? It's kind of a bit of a bit rhetorical, I know. But the other concern in my mind is that businesses are obviously going to be facing huge pressures with their energy bills and so on. But yeah, I'm just sort of picking my brains and yours on it, if that makes sense.
I'll try and answer some of that. Going back in time, the last time this committee considered this issue, because we had to for the first extension to the regulations, this committee recommended that we did introduce a fee, and it was at GNR that it was decided that we would carry on with the free licence, if you like, at that time. For me, I think there's a difference between the temporary arrangements as they were first introduced when food businesses weren't allowed to open inside, and the only way they could operate was by serving people on the pavement, and this effectively replacing the pavement cafe regime that the county council used to sort of operate in the area. It was not really very proactive in terms of its operation. And for me, whilst this was something to support businesses reopening, I understood the council's position. It was council that decided it rather than officers, that we would offer this for free because it helped them to recover. However, going forward, it becomes a sort of legitimate business cost, doesn't it? And so for me, there is a change when these arrangements become about operating rather than about recovery from COVID. Most other authorities, in fact, we're the only authority in Derbyshire now who don't charge.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I needed. Thanks.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Have we sussed out the cost of administration for these licences, Eileen?
Not exactly, but based on similar type licences that we administer, we think that the £100 cap is probably a fair fee, in that with these licences there is an element of they're expecting an element of enforcement to be put into it, whereas some of the other licences, like temporary event notices and such like, that are quick fix licences, we don't necessarily have to follow up any enforcement with those, as may well be the case with this. So no is the answer, in truth. We haven't costed it out, but councils that have and do charge the maximum fee say it would be unlikely that you would be able to administer it for less than £100.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Like Colin just said, business is still tight. People aren't still coming out like they should be. But end of the day, myself personally, I think there should be a charge, because everybody's got to be paid and everybody's got to make money. Everybody can't keep losing money. It's got to be a fair fee across the board, really, I think. And I agree with the fee, basically.
Councillor Swindle.
Final question, Chair, and then I'm happy to move it. We're being asked to recommend the GNR committee that they bring in a fee. Are we leaving it at that, or do we recommend how much that fee should be, or is that for the GNR committee to decide? Do we offer them a recommendation?
Last time committee considered that, the committee did recommend a fee of £100.
If the officers think £100 is good enough, I'm happy to move the recommendations with £100.
It's probably worth mentioning as well, Chair, that with it not going to GNR until the annual fee setting meeting, which is later in the year, I'm not sure if it's November or December, we wouldn't be asking for the fee to be introduced before the 1st of April. So all the businesses now that haven't got one, if they got on with it and applied, they'd be getting a licence that would last them until September 2023, free of charge, and hopefully by then things might have evened out a bit. And the cost would come in then when they were reapplying at that point.
Councillor Lees.
Yeah, sorry. Is there anything we can do to promote these businesses that haven't got one, haven't got a licence or haven't taken the offer up? Is there something we can put out there that
That is the plan, Chair.
Yeah, because some of them probably don't even know they need one, basically.
Yeah, that is the plan, Chair. I mean, there are lots of businesses across Derbyshire Dales, and I'm sure across the country, that have had tables and chairs outside their food or drink businesses for years and years and years and years, and never had a licence from the county council or from anywhere else. And they're the ones that we will have to target those as well, you know, so that it's an equal playing field for all food and drink businesses. With regard to Councillor Swindell's comment earlier about shops that are not food and drink businesses, but, you know, do have, my words, not yours, lots of rammel and stuff outside, and that's really nothing to do with pavement cafe licensing. It's obstruction of the highway, and that's still a county council function, as are A boards and such like.
Very good. Councillor Swindle.
Chair, I'm still happy with that motion.
Very good.
Yeah,
Is there a
table,
seconder?
thank you.
Councillor Elliott. Very good. All those in favour? Excellent. Right, item 6. Taxis and private hire vehicles, Safeguarding and Road Safety Act 2022. Another one, please, Arlene.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is just to inform members really that a new piece of legislation was enacted on the 31st of March this year. The Act places duties on licensing authorities across England to share safeguarding and road safety concerns about taxi and private hire vehicle drivers with each other. It intends to support taxi and private hire vehicle licensing authorities in complying with the Act. Basically, there are a lot of authorities that license taxis, and then those taxis and taxi drivers then go on to operate in other districts. I mean, that's not something that we suffer an awful lot of in Derbyshire Dales, to the best of my knowledge, but I know there are some authorities within Derbyshire that do have a lot of taxis from outside, outside their district, operating within their district. And what this legislation does is it gives the authority in which that vehicle and driver are operating the tool to be able to notify the authority which licensed them in the first place of any problem, any safeguarding or road safety issues, because basically, as the taxi licensing legislation stands at the moment, only the authority that issued the driver with the badge or issued the vehicle with the license plate can take enforcement action. So this is it's not really inviting authorities to share that information. It's insisting that licensing authorities must comply with the guidance. And basically, what they're saying is that when a licensing authority is provided with information by another authority, it then has to consider whether to suspend or revoke that driver's licence and inform the authority that shared the information in the first place of its decision. So the guidance that's contained in the report is focused on supporting compliance with the first aspect, and that is the new duties that came into effect from the 31st of May. So that's the bit about telling another authority if we were to come across a vehicle or a driver in this authority belonging to another authority, we would have to put that into action and have a system in place for notifying them. The second aspect of the Act talks about a national register of refusals, suspensions and revocations. It's a national database. The guidance in how that's going to pan out, for want of a better word, is awaited, but it is suggested, or it's thought, that at the moment there is a what they call an NR3 register, which we have spoken before about at this committee and which this council is in the process of signing up to. There is a suggestion that that is going to be the one that the Secretary of State nominates as the national database, purely based on the fact that with the introduction of the national taxi licensing standards the year before last, it was one that was recommended, and a lot of authorities, in fact most licensing authorities now, will have signed up to it. So we'll have to await that guidance for that latter part. But in the meantime, as I say, we are in the process of signing up to that NR3 database. So we should be ahead of the game when that guidance comes out. So the report is at this moment asking for us as a licensing authority to put a process in place so that the licensing team are aware of any complaints they receive about drivers not licensed by us operating in the district, if there were any, if they weren't behaving in the way that they're expected to, that with those we would have a mechanism for reporting those concerns. And I think we have to report those concerns within 10 days of witnessing them or evidencing them to that local authority. So that's it really, Chair. It's a fairly simple report, and it's a piece of legislation that we must comply with.
Councillor Swindle.
That's kind of it, isn't it? We've got to comply with it, so there's sort of no bones about it. But I might be wrong in thinking, Eileen, that this is good and bad for you because it's more work, but also it's a sort of power to your elbow to deal with taxi drivers that are either a nuisance or not adhering to regulations in our district. So I see it, I don't know if I'm right in thinking there, that that's a double-edged sword for you.
I think because it's aimed mostly at safeguarding and road safety concerns as opposed to just general breaches of taxi legislation, obviously it is very important. As I say, from my knowledge, and I'm sure I would know if we had got an influx of drivers licensed by other authorities operating in our district, because I'm sure our trade would tell me, it isn't a problem for us at the moment. I mean, we do license probably 30% of our licensed drivers operate elsewhere. They don't operate in the Dales. They operate in Derby. They operate in Sheffield. So those authorities, it will give them the tool to be able to report any concerns that are reported to them about our drivers, which they haven't got at the moment. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a step forward. I mean, the Act does mention that it does mention about making sure that when they're sharing information, licensing authorities cooperate as fully as possible, but subject to their obligations under data protection legislation. So there are going to be controls in place for how that information is shared. It's not just going to be open the book and tell them everything sort of thing. But again, we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, the Act does define what safeguarding and road safety concerns are, and they are, specifically information that might indicate that a person has committed a sexual offence or has harassed another person, caused physical or psychological harm to another person, committed an offence that involves a risk of causing physical or psychological harm. So I guess these are things that would have happened once those people have got their licence, but may not necessarily have gotten as far as prosecution or conviction, and perhaps not been revealed on their DBS. I mean, I'm not really that sure, but that's how I would envisage the information being shared.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think it's a very sensible way forward, this, and I think it's been a long time coming, and I'm very pleased it's here, and I fully support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lees.
Does this have any effect with the CCTV in the taxis, Eileen, at all? That it's been up before us before. Does it encourage them even more so to have the CCTVs in, with joining up with other people, if you like?
I guess the CCTV issue is something that is going to rumble on, and I think, as Tim's mentioned at previous meetings, it will probably in time become mandatory anyway. I mean, at the moment, as I think we've reported before, we haven't got evidence to suggest that it should be made mandatory through our taxi licensing policy, but I mean, it's something that this is something that introduces things that, whilst we've got to do them, we would still make sure that our policy review that will be coming up in the next few months, that changes will be made to, to ensure that people applying for badges are well aware of the information that is going to be shared about them. About CCTV, I mean, it doesn't suggest that it should be made mandatory. That's not what this legislation is looking at, as far as I'm aware.
Just for information, we had information back in June that Chesterfield considered the issue of CCTV in taxis, and they decided not to make it mandatory at that stage. There wasn't evidence enough in Chesterfield to support that change from discretionary to mandatory. It's just one example locally, but eventually it will come. It will be the expectation, but just at the moment it's not quite there.
Thank you. Councillor Swindle.
If it's not been moved, Chair, I'll move it.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Gretrix. Second.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Go to the vote. All those in favour? Got that. Very good. Right. That's it. Thank you very much. We're all done. Fun?
We do have a more
Well done.
substantial report on taxi licensing policy coming up, probably for the